Hi everyone, I thought I would do a little video to just talk about the upcoming statement of the research problem assignment so that hopefully this will cover some of the areas that you might have questions about and maybe some, not exactly tips and tricks, but things to be watching for when you're doing the assignment. So certainly after you've watched this, if you have any more questions, then I'm more than happy to answer them. So please do get in touch if you need some help. Okay, the assignment description is pretty straightforward. You're going to be writing a statement of the research problem, and the assignment is worth 20% of your mark. The purpose is to learn more about the key first step in conducting research, that is, identifying a research problem. And while the problem that your research ultimately addresses may change over time, you may do this assignment and do some other things during the course and then decide that you'd rather do something different in your final research project. Nevertheless, at this point, it's going to be helpful to your development as a researcher to identify a research problem that is of interest to you and then consider its appropriateness in light of Creswell and Guterman's discussion in Chapter 2. In addition, and this is important in this course especially, identifying a research problem now will provide you with a focus for upcoming assignments, and that will be helpful to you in even if you do change, you'll have gone through the process once and you'll feel more comfortable with it the next time around. Step one in the process, and you'll see in the description of the assignment that it's divided into steps. So the first step is that you're going to, before you write anything, you're going to consult with some colleagues, and that is you're going to identify 2 or 3 research problems that you might be interested in various areas of your practice or things you've been thinking about. And then you may want to discuss these areas with colleagues, mentors, and so on to see what their feelings are about these areas. And that will help you then determine the general interest that exists around the problems that you've identified. And students have found that that's been a very helpful process in thinking the whole issue through a little bit with their colleagues so that it helps them solidify what it is that they're actually after and what kind of general problem area they're really interested in. Step 2 is that once you've considered the following criteria, then you're going to choose one of those 2 or 3 that you've talked to colleagues with or friends with about. And there are some things that you need to have considered before you make your final decision. So there may be something that you're really interested in, but you have to travel to Nunavut or something to be able to do the research. So you really have to think about, are there sufficient resources necessary to research the problem you've chosen? That is, are there financial resources that are available? For example, if you've decided to do a big quantitative analysis, and do you have the financial resources for the kind of instrument that you would need to gather your data? Do you have the research program on your computer that tend to be extremely expensive that would enable you to do the analysis that you need, and so on? Do you have the time that available for the kind of work that you would need to do? Because there's research and you're the only one that's going to be doing this research project. You're not going to have 2 or 3 other people. So for example, a lot of people say, I want to do mixed methods, but that really means that you're doing 2 projects. You're doing a quantitative analysis and you're doing a qualitative analysis, and then you're marrying that information into one study. So that takes a significant amount of time, sometimes other kinds of resources as well. So you need to be aware of the kind of time that you have available within the program so that you can get your research project done in time. Do you have accessibility to the participants that you need? Again, I'm going to talk about quantitative, where you need very large samples in order for your results to have any kind of validity at all. So do you have that kind of access, or are you going to have to think about the problem that you're looking at differently because you're going to you just don't have the time or the access to that number of people? So these are the kinds of things you need to be thinking about. Secondly, you're going to have to ask yourself, will studying this problem make a significant contribution to the existing literature and educational practices? And you'll know that once you've done a library search using the library search engines and so on to see what the scholarly literature actually says about your research problem. Is what you were thinking of doing actually already covered by many different authors in many different countries or many different provinces in Canada or whatever? If that's the case, then is there a niche within that you could still have a look at, or is it covered sufficiently? You need to rethink where you're going with this. So that's going to be part of what you're going to be looking at when you're doing putting together your research problem as well. And then you're going to consider how your research might contribute to that body of literature. So it may be that there's never been work done of this kind in the particular location that you're in, or within Canada, for example, or with a particular population, a certain age group, and so on. So in that way, it's going to contribute to the research. But you need to think about what it actually is going to do to help broaden that body of literature for others. Do you have any ideas about what research approach is likely best in approaching this research problem? So at this point, we haven't even talked about a lot of those research approaches. You've probably been exposed to some of them in different ways in other courses that you've taken. But at this point, you may not be familiar with all forms of research. And you can think about how, but you can, even though you haven't been, you can think about how this research might be approached. So you might think about, well, I could do interviews, or I could do surveys, or I could do a case study, etc. So you could kind of imagine, but you don't have to concentrate on that area. Just think a little bit about, is this feasible? Are the methods that are available to answer the questions that might come out of this problem, even feasible? So that's part of the thinking too before you make a final decision. Next, what problems you considered and why you chose the one. So you're going to write up the statement of the problem, and that it's going to need to include, first of all, that consideration you had at the beginning of the process. What problems did you consider, and why did you choose this particular one? So you're going to make a brief statement about that. You don't need to write paragraphs and paragraphs, but just, a kind of, this is how I kind of came to this problem. And then you're going to talk about your general topic. You're going to provide the actual statement of your research problem, and that needs to be clearly delineated so it's not buried somewhere in the paper, but it's clearly evident to anybody reading the document. You're going to provide a justification for the research problem. You're going to look at the evidence that already exists and what are some of the deficiencies in the evidence that you might need to look more deeply for, or think about differently, or whatever it might be. And you're going to then think about how your research problem relates to audiences that might be interested in reading what it is that you're going to be producing in the end. And in order to explore all of these different aspects of the assignment, I want you to look very carefully at pages 64 to 75 in Creswell and Guterman as a guide for constructing your statement of the problem, because they're going to give you lots of information about each aspect of this. Other than this one, this is something that we're asking you to do as a preliminary part of it. But the actual writing of the statement, Creswell and Guterman do a good job of providing that information. In terms of the literature that's going to support your work, you're welcome to use literature from Edu 510, but you're going to also need references from peer-reviewed academic journals. And they're going to be necessary to support your statement of the problem. And the reason for that is because you're going to need to situate your problem in the literature. What does the literature say, and what can't you find at this point, or what's missing in the literature, and that sort of thing. So you're going to have a look at what actually exists. You're going to use references from professional journals, or you may use references from professional journals, but they're absolutely not necessary. Sometimes they're good to kind of introduce something, but they don't have the kind of academic rigor yet to support fully, but they may be useful. So you're not going to use many of them, and you should limit them to no more than 1 or 2. Of course, excellent use of APA 7th edition is going to be expected. You can use the library resources that I have mentioned to you before for citations and references, and you'll find that actually in the list that I made up of the reference list for the readings from the course. And there's right at the bottom of that, there's information how you get to the library information about APA 7th edition. So you can look that up. If you have access to the actual text with APA 7th edition, that's even better. So if you run into something and you just can't find it anywhere on that page in the library and you don't have access, then you can get in touch with me and I'll try to figure it out. Maximum 5 to 7 pages, double spaced, Times Roman 12, or something like that. It could be Helvetica, you know, those sorts of things. Something that's clear and clean and readable, and 12-point font, 1-inch margins. The cover page, and make sure you include a cover page, and the references are not included in the page count. So, so this is simply for the actual statement of your research problem. The rubric, and of course you know that the rubric and the description for the assignment are both on the Submit Your Assignments section of eClass. So have a good look at the rubric. The rubric categories for evaluation, and then there's all kinds of you know, other criteria within each of these categories. So have a look at those and see what kinds of expectations there are and what marks are assigned to those. But each of these categories is worth 5 marks. So your first would be coming to the research problem, and how appropriate and fulsome that whole exploration was. The development of the statement of the research problem, that's going to be very important, and that will be 5 marks. And again, have a look at the rubrics that are within that category. The development and organization of ideas, that is how you actually present it. What kinds of strategies do you use to ensure that your work is highly readable, that the flow of the ideas is clear and concise and clean and well edited, and you know, minimal, if any, problems with grammar, punctuation, the complete sentences, all of that sort of thing. All of that needs to be attended to before you hand it in. And then correct use of citations and references. So each of these categories is worth 5 marks. And there's lots of descriptors within each of those categories. So as I mentioned, do have a look at them. And if you have any questions about any of this, after you've had a look at the Creswell and Guterman and you're really wondering about any of the categories or whatever it happens to be, please get in touch and I'd be more than happy to help you with it. So I hope this helps just a little bit, so that you can kind of situate yourself in the assignment and have a clearer idea of what's expected. So good luck with it, and I'll be looking forward to reading your papers very much.